So yeah, I'm gonna get started in about I think maybe 2 minutes, and I would kick off with some.
I think it's working.
What? Cool.
Are you able to access it? Do you have a Facebook account?
Yeah.
Would you mind checking it through that?
Yeah, but
Yeah, sorry.
so many socials.
Yeah, that's good. Go back.
All right. So thank you everybody for coming. So people are probably still going to stream in, but I'll just get started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Win Bergman. I hope you know. If you don't know, that's the sign behind me. I'm running for DC Council, which you probably also know from just driving about on Cathedral Avenue. I live on the first floor in the East Building, in this complex with my family. So Samir over there, and Ramona, and my wife Ramona. So you can see us. That's who we are. I want to spend most of the time answering questions about literally anything that people want to talk about, but I wanted to first just sort of talk about why I'm running and sort of the challenges that I see facing our city and how this moment I think is particularly important for us to focus on getting this decision right, who succeeds Mary Cherry, who's been in this role for a long time. So a little about me, I'm an attorney, I'm a former elementary school teacher. I am an ANC commissioner and the chair of ANC 3D, and I'm a dad, as I just said. I'm also a public school graduate, and before coming here, I was at Yale, and then I was a teacher. So there are a lot of candidates in this race. If you've looked at your ballot, you've noticed that. I talked to a lady in Blue Park the other day, and she said to me, I've done my homework. I've narrowed the race down to only 9 people. And I really, which, I completely understand. And I think the thing about the challenge of all primaries, but this kind of primary in particular, is that there are a lot of things that people agree on. And especially when people speak for 60 seconds, which is what happens at forums, we can sound somewhat similar and blend in together. But there are real differences. And so I'm running because I think we can do better as a city because we have some big challenges, right? Downtown is empty. It's an utter crisis. Homelessness is up. Crime is up. Traffic fatalities are up. Our schools had endured this incredible challenge the last 2 years, and now they have new challenges that are pretty unprecedented. Dealing with learning loss, dealing with kids who spent the last 2 years alone in a room instead of with their friends, and that has a lot of impacts on kids. But also, even before that, the public schools in this area were overcrowded. Kids had timed lunches. They didn't have enough space to do the special education services that they need. Those happen in closets in some schools because they just don't have the space. And then the thing that I think is relevant to everybody here, housing and childcare. Incredibly expensive. And this is an incredible place to live. It's an incredible place to raise a family, to age in place. You gonna come here? But Carrie, you do? Okay. Well, I saw you. I'm gonna go road and not know what the number All right. We'll see how long this lasts. It's also one of the least affordable places to live in the country. We are tied for #1 in housing costs. We're tied for #1 in daycare costs. It's $25,000 a year on average for infant care, which is equivalent to 1/3 of the median income. Right? No, that's it. You want to go there? No. Oh, that's what okay. It's never an easy day. But to deal with that, we can't just be nibbling around the edges, right? We have to have real solutions to these problems, bold solutions. Sorry about that. So I think the two things that are really critical there is we need a council that takes the job seriously throughout oversight. Because one of the problems in this city, I think, is that people don't ask hard questions. We have... Pause real quick. We're just going to... I'm going to pass her off real quick. Thank you for patience. One of the challenges, if you watch any of the forums, they always happen during bedtime, which is a real problem in our house. They tend to be a difficult thing. But, so on oversight, one of the things I admire about Mary Chang is that she took the job very seriously. She understood the importance of nuance. And that is a crucial thing for the council. We've had, when we talk about schools, some people might follow this, some people might not have. There was a lot of it was an unexpected situation when COVID first struck. But then next year, what was the plan? How are we going to get people back to school? How are we going to do it in a way that made teachers feel safe, that made parents feel safe, that got kids back in the classroom? That entire conversation happened behind closed doors. They didn't engage people. They didn't talk to parents and talk to teachers about it until the plan was dropped. And one of the things that teachers asked for, and parents asked for, let's have outdoor learning, which if you went around in private schools in Ward 3, there were a lot of tents outside. People were learning outside, and safely. That didn't happen. Now, there might be good reasons for that. There might be cost reasons for that. There was never a hearing where they asked the chancellor, why did you not engage with teachers in a collaborative manner to come to a solution? Why do we not have learning outdoors? Never. When we talk about transit, we have this Vision Zero plan. It's a lot of flashy headlines, and yet there are more people dying on the roads every day, every year, in DC than when Mayor Bowser announced the plan. That's an oversight there, right? And if you see that throughout the city, you see people who refuse to ask hard questions because it might embarrass them. And that's what happens in a one-party town. So we need people to push, and that's something I'm committed to doing. And then the other thing is we need to take the affordability crisis seriously. And so on housing, that means building more homes in a real way. You know, we live here, this is the towers, this is across from Western Heights. If you were Jewish, if you were black, you would not have been able to buy a home in that neighborhood. There are covenants on the books still. You go, you look them up, they'll say that you were not allowed to buy a home there. And that's true throughout World War III. Redlining, racial covenants, those things don't go away when they become illegal, right? The impact continues when you prevent people from building homes, when you prevent people from making a neighborhood more affordable. And my message as a council member would be, a neighborhood that opposes the construction of an apartment building that has rental units, that has condo units that are affordable, a neighborhood that opposes that in their area, it's not a welcoming one. And that doesn't matter what the signs say, it doesn't matter how they vote when it comes in federal elections. It's not a welcoming neighborhood. And so we need a council member to push us to live the progressive values that are supposedly so crucial to the district. So that's why I'm running. I want to take some questions, but the other point I'd say, there are a lot of candidates in this race. There are candidates with name recognition. There are candidates with, important backers, important friends. It's a very fluid race. It comes down to neighbor-to-neighbor conversation. Only about 50,000 people are going to vote in this election, and the winner is going to win with only 4,000, 5,000, maybe less. There are 9 candidates. So if you are engaged, if you, by the end of tonight, you walk out of here and say, I want to vote for Ben Bergman, please go and talk to 5 people. Because that is how we're going to win the election, is by those neighbor-to-neighbor connections. So thank you very much. I guess, so if people have questions, I can start, I'll repeat them and then we can start answering them. Are there, yes?
Can you explain what some of your positions are that
Yeah.
GGW endorsement?
Can I explain what that means, or?
What your positions are that led to that endorsement?
Sure, yeah. So the question was, for the people who are watching on Facebook and Instagram, what were my positions that led to the Greater Greater Washington endorsement? So for those of you who are not familiar, Greater Greater Washington is in one part of it is a publication. They have a website where they kind of publish commentary and research, and the other part of it is an advocacy organization. And they are really focused on transit and housing, on how to make the city, not just DC, but the region, function better, be more livable, be more affordable. And so I think what they responded well to was, if you go to my website, benbergman.com/housing, and read my plan, it goes on for quite a bit, and it's a comprehensive plan. Because the key to dealing with housing is to recognize that it's not a simple issue. There's not a magic bullet to making the city more diverse and more affordable, especially this ward. You have to do everything. So that means, it doesn't just mean talking about building apartment buildings on Wisconsin Avenue and Connecticut Avenue, which there are people in this race who are not comfortable with that idea. Or who will go slow on those things, which I don't understand. But it also means talking about, in Spring Valley, it's illegal to build a row house because of minimum lot size. So you can't even build more affordable single-family homes there. We don't build buildings at scale because we have so many impediments in some of our major corridors. And that creates a real crisis for people who live here. If you want to buy an apartment in this building, and you buy it 5 years ago, and you go and you look at what the resale value is for it now, it's gone up, and it's going to keep going up. And that's good for those of us who own an apartment. It's not so good for those of us who want to own an apartment. right? Or who want to downsize to an apartment from a house, or want to retire here and live on a fixed income, and those HOA costs obviously keep going up. So part of it is just recognizing, I think, the comprehensive nature of the housing problem. I think Greater Washington responded to that. I think the other thing they said in their endorsement was that I explicitly talked about how dealing with housing aggressively is central to making this a diverse and inclusive ward that undoes some of the impacts, some of those legacies of redlining and segregation. So we're not going to be able to do that if we, have neighborhoods that don't allow any development, where the houses keep getting more expensive, and they keep blocking and suing to prevent even a modest number of apartments near them. Everybody here lives in the multifamily building across from a single-family neighborhood, and I don't see a lot of conflict. I don't see their housing values going down. What I do see, and what I tell people, is that we have 3 restaurants. We have a mall right there, and that exists because of the foot traffic from us in this building, adding to the density of this area. And it doesn't make it less bucolic, doesn't make it less gentle, right? It just makes it a more diverse area. You compare our census tract to the census tract just one over, there's a couple $100,000 difference in the average income. It's a remarkable thing in 2 adjacent census tracts. And that's because people can rent here, people can retire here, and afford to. Some, but we have to move more quickly. The other piece, and I'll just wrap up really quickly, is transit. I have an aggressive transit plan. This area, we all know, has no metro connection. It's a huge problem. And for everybody who wants to get anywhere, we have to use the bus, we have to drive, and we have to take a taxi. In the past 2 years, that first option of taking the bus hasn't really been a real option, right? We haven't been able to do that because it's not reliable. It wasn't very reliable previously, before COVID either, but at least it was coming. And if you go to Glover Park, one of the densest parts of DC, they're 3 miles from a metro station. It makes no sense, and it's a huge limitation on our economic potential and on our dynamism, that we don't have the ability to move people easily in and out, right? And it also limits housing, because when people talk about building housing in the Palisades, on Parker Boulevard, the complaint is always, well, how are people going to get there? There's no public, the bus never comes. There will be more cars. And while that's used as a cop-out to try to prevent, more development near folks, it's not entirely illegitimate. There is a good public transit. So we need to, as a city, short-term, focus on building bus lanes and bus priority signals. So lights that will change to green when your bus comes automatically. It's not a hard thing to do. We should be doing that throughout the city on every bus line. The other thing is we should invest in the circulator and the streetcar to connect people. We have these buses that are operated by us. It's not a Lomata thing. It's not something we have to negotiate with Virginia, Maryland about. And right now, the circulator is a vanity project that connects tourists down to the mall. It doesn't connect people to where they need to go. It doesn't help get people who need to go to the metro, like us. It doesn't help us, It doesn't help the kids who are going to go to high school get there faster. So that is the other piece, I think, from why I'm going to go is that we have got to be aggressive about it. And we have to be ambitious about it, because just because something is big, and transit is a big thing, right? You have to think about it 5, 10, 20 years and be committed, which is something that we've not always done. But it pays off, right? The first metro station in DC was built right around the time of Home Rule, right? And then so the whole, basically, modern DC parallels the growth of the metro. And I don't think people can really think now about a DC that doesn't have the metro system that we have, which is imperfect, right? Think about the next stage if we build one that actually is designed for Washingtonians, not for people from Virginia and Maryland to get them down there, which is what we have. Thank you for the question. Yes?
Thank you for asking the hard questions and being accountable and coming up with realistic transportation solutions that we need. Can you just comment on your plan with regards to meeting the environmental targets that the City Council was supposed to be on track to do and seems to be pretty steady?
Yeah. So the question was, how do we meet our environmental targets that we've set? So one of the things that, it's kind of like Vision Zero, it's a little different, but We set very ambitious targets. They really are quite impressive. All of our goals that we're gonna be carbon neutral by. Now the date is escaping me, but it's very ambitious. We have not moved quickly on it, and there are a lot of imperfect aspects to our environmental progress. And I think part of that is being willing to spend money on things and invest money in things that are important. So, and it could mean that we might need to increase taxation or increase the sort of the fee burden on buildings downtown so that they can retrofit those buildings, install solar panels. But the other part of it, I think that's just as important, is we have to be willing to say to folks who don't like any kind of change in their neighborhood that the point of historic preservation is not to limit your ability to put a solar panel on your roof, right? Which is what is the current status in neighborhoods that are historic neighborhoods. It's an extraordinary ordeal to just do some basic things on your own to make your home more energy efficient. So I think that's part of it, breaking through some of those limitations that we put on people who want to do the right thing. The other part of it, I think, is a land use issue. Like, we need to be forcing our private landowners to do more. But then the other piece of it is, as a city, we need to be spending the money to actually make these things happen, to go electric with our buses, to invest in reducing gas usage, natural gas usage, which will have a big impact in new buildings. We can make that happen. We can focus funds on taking buildings that are older, like this one, where we all know the maintenance costs are extraordinary, because some of these things don't even exist anymore, right? They don't sell the convectors that we use in our apartments. So that's a huge cost, and especially for rental buildings, so not our building, but an older rental building, upkeep is a huge problem. And if we do not assist landlords or hold them accountable for doing what they need to do, we're going to see those buildings fall out of circulation in terms of the affordability crisis, because those buildings will become too expensive to maintain. But at the same time, we can use assisting them to help with our environmental goals, because we can hit two birds with one stone. So those are some of the things I talk about. My website, I talk about a few other issues. Microgrids, I think, are important to invest in those. Even small things like recycling, composting, which is not difficult to do in a lot of multifamily buildings. We don't actually recycle glass. Well, it says glass, but they don't actually recycle it. It's not really. So investing in those things, that'll also have an impact. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing we can do as a city to deal with the climate is to take housing and transit seriously. Because if we invest in building more homes and in building a better transit system and decreasing the cars on our roads, that's going to have a huge impact. And that's not something we've done enough, and that's important for other business as well. In the back.
Hi, Cecilia Perry. I wonder how you plan to deal with the issue or your thoughts on homelessness and the encampments and the huge problem we have in the city because of lack of affordable housing.
Yeah.
And living wages.
Yeah. So the question was about the homelessness crisis in the city, how to deal with it, how to deal with encampments, how to deal with the fact that it is caused by the lack of affordable housing to begin with, which I think is true for at least some of it. So this is obviously a big issue in the campaign. It comes up at a lot of forums. I think it's difficult to talk about, because at one level, yes, public space, parks, they belong to all of us, and we can't have a situation in which there are permanent encampments on public parks, especially near schools. There are a lot of concerns about the safety issues for residents of the encampments and residents nearby. But I think the more important focus shouldn't be about, I think, where the conversation has been, which is how do you clear encampments, when do you clear encampments. The focus should be, how are we addressing the individuals who are homeless and recognizing that the causes are as unique as the people who are there, right? So there are a lot of folks who, there's a disproportionate number of homeless people who are LGBT, who are young, who are there because their family rejected them. That is a certain proportion of folks. And so simply housing them is not necessarily the issue, right? They're on the streets because they don't feel comfortable going back to where they did have housing. There are folks who do have mental illness, but that's not everybody, right? And I think there's a huge tendency to say that homelessness is a mental illness crisis and treat it like that. There are folks who don't have affordable housing, and so on. And so the issue is we have to invest in social services to reach people, to get people out of the encampments, to place them in the housing that they need. And when you see the kind of evictions that we saw during the winter, so I signed a letter with other ANC commissioners urging the mayor not to proceed with evicting folks in January when it was cold, when we knew that most of those people were going to be relocated. They weren't going to be relocated, they were going to move elsewhere in the city. And they were going to lose their possessions, they were going to lose their tent, and they were going to then be somewhere else without those things in the dead of winter. That didn't make a lot of sense. But more importantly, I think it spoke to the failure of the program. Why were there so many people who supposedly were all offered housing not leaving? Why were we not connecting with those folks sufficiently in that first period? And I think it's because they went once, they went twice, they talked to somebody, person wasn't sure they wanted to go to a hotel first, rather stay here, and they gave up, and then they came in with the bulldozers. That's not the way you deal with people who need assistance. And the other piece of it that is very relevant in this ward that's been a big issue, and I think it's important to talk about it very carefully, which I don't think every candidate has done, is what happens when people are rehoused, and when people have housing assistance vouchers and are placed in buildings, and occasionally there might be tension with neighbors. And I think that is it returns to an oversight issue. For the past year and a half, people have been raising concerns about increased crime in certain buildings on Connecticut Avenue. It came up at ANC meetings. It's been an issue, right? And one of the things that people said was, I don't see anyone ever coming to talk to these people regularly. Where are the caseworkers? Where are the support services? And I think it's pretty clear the pandemic impacted that. People were not being delivered the services that they were entitled to or that we hoped they would get. But no one has really looked into that at the council. It's very superficial. They don't want to talk about it because it's politically sensitive. And that's not the way to deal with these challenges. And I think at the end of the day, that's the key. But, housing first works when it's fully funded. And so I hear from a lot of candidates say, we need more social services, and we need more police, and we need more schools, but I'm not willing to ever raise a dime of taxes for millionaires in this ward and for businesses. And I haven't said I'm going to raise taxes. I haven't said that that's relevant. We've had surpluses. It's not necessary at this time. But if things are important to us, and I think if you talk to someone in Connecticut Avenue who's frustrated with the fact that there is someone in their building who's not getting the services and clearly needs it, and there is a negative impact on the whole building, that's important to them, right? That's something that's important, should be important to all of us. So we need to pay for that and fund it and be willing to, even if that means marginal tax increases on the wealthy. So a lot of the increase in homeless assistance vouchers in the city was paid for by a recent tax increase that amounted, I think, to a couple $100 for people who make $1 million. It's nothing that anyone noticed. But at the time, people said, there's going to be a tax spike. People are going to move to Maryland because they're going to be asked to pay $300 more to pay for huge expansion of the social safety net to respond to the encampment problem, which everyone else, was saying was a huge issue at the same time. So we can't be doing both at the same time. We have to be, if we think something's a problem, we have to follow through on the solution and be willing to pay for it. Yes, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Hi.
Couple of questions for you. Can you please give us your thoughts on small businesses?
Sure.
Particularly along the Connecticut Avenue corridor.
Sure.
How it has impacted their business with COVID and landlords. Some areas that I know, like where you place the sign off Pheasant Street.
Okay, yeah.
There was one business, small business there, who's been there for 28 years, and the landlord refused to renew the lease. Okay, so this is an issue that I've seen a lot with landlords, and also the impact it's going to have with the bike lanes. Bike lanes that, as you and I talked about before, some don't connect, they go to nowhere, and displacing people's ability to park.
Yeah.
Okay, that's number one.
Sure. You want to ask the second one, then?
And the second one was, since you're still our ANC
Yes.
representative,
Yeah.
what is happening with this parking situation?
Yes, I'll talk about that first. Yes. Yes, good question. So the first question was about the parking issue on Cathedral Avenue, which, if you know, you know what I'm talking about. So the answer to the immediate question, it will be changed. The lines will be changed and the signs will be updated spring/summer. So we are in summer, so summer. I asked for a definitive date this week, and I got back spring/summer. So that's where we are right now. It's in the queue, and I think it's to be fair to them, and that's how they work. But you know, the parking situation I think is emblematic of like the problem with DDOT. It's a huge, massive bureaucracy staffed with good people who really want to do. You know, they have new transit policy. They want to do nice. They want to build great bus lanes and build nice roads, and they're into that. But they are very balkanized, and I think the fact that you could replace the lines without replacing the signs, and then the safety investigation happens in all different offices, and all of that is reflective of an agency that has metastasized in a way that's not happened for itself. And we need to have you know, the council be on top of that, because when DDOT doesn't do that, you know, this is a relatively simple thing. You know, the towers, we could have done it, right? It's not that hard. We just need to come, take the signs down, we print the signs in DC. They could have just, it's not that hard. But the fact that it took this long, and it was even an ordeal to figure out why it happened and who was responsible for the decision within the agency. Think about bigger projects that they're working on, right? Think about more expensive, you know, the redesign of Connecticut Avenue, for instance. Like how do we make that work if we have groups that work in vulcanized capacities? It's a problem. And on Connecticut Avenue, on the bike lane project, in particular, I think what I say is we should not think of it as a bike lane project, and we should stop talking about bike lane projects and bus lane projects, and just start talking about Connecticut Avenue, Wisconsin Avenue projects, New Mexico Avenue projects, because one of the dangers that I see when we talk about the bike lane on New Mexico, early in the process, the only thing they wanted to talk to me about was the bike lane, where it would go and what would it look like. And I said, well, okay, but can we also talk about the crossing situation? Because two people have been struck right there at Cathedral, New Mexico in recent years. One person was struck at New Mexico and Lowell, and there are children crossing every day, and we all know it's an incredibly dangerous street. Can we talk about that? Well, that is a different process, right? Those are different people. And then they did come around to it, because I said, you know, we're not going to, this is not going to happen if we can't also include things that are important to other folks, pedestrian improvements that people say they really want. And I think, you know, it did click for them, but it's not when you go south into the next ANC, they didn't have that conversation. And so there's considerable more opposition to the bike lane project there, because there was no discussion of other things. Bus lanes, bus stops, issues that are very relevant in Lower Park, but we're not part of the discussion. So we gotta have teams that come in and talk about a whole street design, because A, it creates problems when they want to move forward, because people don't necessarily see something that's valuable to them, or they think it's a zero-sum game. But the other issue is that once you build a bike lane, if you didn't also extend the curbs, you have a curb extension to have shorter sidewalk, you're not going to do it for 15, 20 years, right? That's how it works, because then you're in the back of the queue again. So that is the problem. We can't do that. And so I'm going to get out of it on the small businesses, on the parking issue. I mean, I think it's legitimate. You know, I drive up Connecticut Avenue because we don't have a good connection over there. And I think the solution to it is to really think about parking in a systematic way. Because right now, you know, the same parking sticker in Spring Valley and over on Connecticut Avenue, you can do all the same things, right? If you have a Ward 3 sticker. Even though there's parking that's extremely plentiful over there, and there's different challenges over as you get towards the commercial strip. So that, I think we need to think about that. And if you go to other parts of the city, like Capitol Hill, for instance, where there isn't much off-street parking, there are a lot of different challenges, right, with parking. So thinking through that, thinking through how can we disincentivize commuter parking on our streets so that those spots are not, so neighbors are not battling with people from Virginia and Maryland for a parking spot. Because if we did a survey of parking in this ANC and down in Wilbur Park as part of the bike lane, and someone actually went and counted all the cars and looked at all the license plates and did it several days. I forget. There's someone who actually, you know, in their real daytime job, they're doing some impressive statistical work, which is something that happens in DC. And what we found is that there is a lot of people who are not DC residents who park on this street, which is even actually not very transit accessible, but they park here during the day. That's a huge problem, right? If you go on Nebraska Avenue and you're driving during the day and it's a 2-lane road, and then suddenly it's a 1-lane road because Virginia car, Maryland car, right? There's never a DC car there during the day. If we're going to give up a travel lane on a major thoroughfare, it should be for a bus or a bike, right? Or both, which you could do, right? It shouldn't be for parking for people who don't even live here, who should be parking somewhere else and taking the train in, right? That's the whole point of the mechanism. So that, I think, is having a parking reform commission, that somebody talked about, we can get around and study it, come up with rules that make sense. Some people talk about having an ANC parking sticker. I think that's problematic because the ANC lines aren't really drawn with that in mind, and that can create all sorts of problems. And for people like us who don't have transit accessibility, I think it'd be a real burden to say that you couldn't drive over to Connecticut Avenue full stop, right? But it's something we need to think about. We need to think about the fact that deliveries are a new fact of life, right? We have all this short-term driving, parking and driving, that was not a thing even 10 years ago, right? There wasn't the Amazon truck on narrow roads every 5 hours like there is now, right? That's a huge shift. So building our roads for tomorrow, instead of trying to hold them on to the 50s style model that we have currently, I think we just have to embrace that. And if we do it in a full-throated way, we can do it successfully. But on the other point of small businesses, I think on COVID, one of the things that happened, especially in downtown, so Connecticut Avenue, that's for sure suffered. But if you go to downtown, it's like even worse, right? And it's because the loss of foot traffic, the loss of people out going to the business. And you know, there are a number of things we can do short term to help those folks, you know, and we've done some of that. But long term, we need to increase density on those commercial strips. It will make them more dynamic, more alive, and more successful. So, and that especially downtown, which has got, you know, 30% office vacancies. It's an extraordinary crisis. It's the economic center of our city, and the solution right now is everyone has to go back to work. But everyone's not going to go back to work. So we need to accept that and come up with a long-term plan to deal with it. It's not something we can deal with right away, but there are things we can start to do. Yes.
Hi, I'm Meg McGuire with the Northwest Opportunity
Hi.
Partners.
How are you?
First of all, thank you for answering questions on questionnaires with some real thought.
Thank you.
Not everybody did. And
It takes some time.
yeah, and I appreciate that you did that. We have a great opportunity in Friendship Heights to create a really different community, a model community with new forms of housing, social housing, limited equity co-ops, things that really will advantage the entire ward.
Yeah.
The Office of Planning is not on course to do that kind of planning. I want to know what kind of advocate you will be when
you have to go up against the administration that wants to do things very much in a mode with a predetermined outcome, it seems.
Yeah. So I think there are. First, thank you for your comment on the questionnaires. I tried to post all of my questionnaire responses on my website, so you can go and read them. Say what I tell other folks. I think I'm the only candidate to do that, and I think it's important because questionnaires not only ask you your views, they often ask you to make commitments. And when people don't post those online and they don't share them beyond the group, you sometimes get a disconnect. And that is something that has happened with other candidates in this race. On Printer Heights, I think there are two issues, and one is I'm going to come to their defense, and one is like no. So I think on one level, the Office of Planning and folks sort of in power, I think have they're very skeptical of this ward's commitment to actually doing what you described and supporting what you described, reimagining the ward to be a diverse place. I think there's a real skepticism outside of our ward that we really need, that we're not going to fight social housing if it actually is something that is going to happen on your block, or that we're not going to fight more affordable units in a structure on Massachusetts Avenue, right? Which is there's a very building that's being held up in litigation for the past number of years. And I think that we need a council member to say to them, no, Ward 3 wants more housing. We want more housing for everyone. We want affordable housing. We want to explore things like social housing that is, that works elsewhere in the world, works even close by in nearby jurisdictions, and is an example of us not being so parochial in the way we think about it, that we can only do market rate with a small bit of inclusionary zoning, and that's all we can do because that's what we've always done. That's not the only option. That's not the only way, right? And we need a council member who will say to them, if there is pushback from people who don't want to build buildings in their neighborhood, I'm not going to run away when that starts. And I'm going to stand there with you and say that I was elected to build more housing for everyone, not just for people who can afford luxury apartments or $1 million homes. That's one thing. I think the other part of it is that is sort of the flip side of it. That there is a great reticence to do big things in the city and in the country. I talk about like the streetcar as a good example. There are light rail systems all throughout the world. It's not like this is not new technology, right? Yet the idea of building a light rail network to supplement our transit system is viewed as this kind of pie in the sky, outrageous idea. If we didn't have a metro system, people would say the same thing about building a train underground, because that's the mode we're in. The mode is no, that's crazy, we can't do that. And that's not, I think, reflective of where we want to be as a country, where we want to be as a city, and it's not how we're going to solve the problems that are massive. Racial segregation is a massive thing. You cannot undo it with, 20 units of inclusionary zoning, 20 units here, 40 units there. That's not how it works, right? You can't undo it by slow rolling the whole process, right? So I think that, again, goes to having a council member who's willing to push for it, who's willing to do all sorts of things. So I don't think that social housing is the only thing we should do, because I think then we won't do it at the scale we need to do it, because it can be expensive and it's going to be hard to figure out how to do it initially, to bring it off the ground, but it has to be part of it. And not including as part of it is holding us back preemptively at the very beginning. We need to try to do everything, we need to have everything on the table, and only if we do those things aggressively will we actually stand a chance to make this an affordable, inclusive board. So that's why I'm supportive of social housing. I'm supportive of making it easier to build market rate housing too. But I think the Wardman, for those folks who are kind of follow this, it's a little bit farther from people who live here, but we did what smart growth advocates, so the people who endorse me from Greater Area Washington would say you have to do, which is liberalize it, we upzoned it, we made it possible for them to build more housing, they didn't. And there isn't really a solution that's easy. Not that there are things that we can do to kind of compel them to do it, and the Office of Planning should do, but it's not as straightforward as some of the other things. We have a whole process. If you want to build, if you want to take a lot over here and split it in two, or you want to take a lot over there and tear down a single-family home and build a duplex, that's a whole process. That's going to be really hard. That's why it doesn't happen. But if you want to tear down a single-family home in this neighborhood, not this neighborhood, because there's actually close. You're going to go one over and tear it down and double it in size, but it's still just for 4 people. There's no barriers for that one. The only issue that comes up for the ANC is, did you change the driveway? That kind of issue. There's no discussion about, well, do we really want another mega mansion here? Wouldn't it be better if we had more smaller homes here? Would it be better if we had more apartments here? That's not part of the discussion. It's not easily part of the discussion because our zoning laws have made it a default, as a matter of default that we don't do. But please give your, you look like you're a follow-up there. So,
we'll talk about streetcars because when you can show me that there is a plan to finance, maintain, operate, and govern a system.
Governance, I think it's huge.
So the administration that proposed that could never come up with any of that, and there's still not a dime being collected. So we're talking about essentially a boondoggle with old technology.
Well, so
very old wired technology that people. But anyway, I don't want to get.
No.
That's kind of off topic. We'll talk about this other time.
It's a good point.
But we are creating a lot of new jobs in this ward with all the development.
Yes.
That's the good news.
Yes, the good news, yes.
The bad news.
Those aren't permanent jobs, though, but they don't become something.
So Wegmans is creating 450 new jobs.
Yes.
Full-time and part-time. But we are falling so far behind in providing affordable housing that will reach those. Out of 3 huge developments at Liza Gallery, Wardman, and Fannie Mae, City Ridge. There are only 163 units of affordable housing. Now those are large sites, and that's because of IZ, which requires almost nothing. So to me, the developers are getting away. I mean, it should be a privilege to work in this great city.
No, I think that's.
And not we're beggars. We're like, oh, you're a developer, so we have to, do whatever you want to do. So,
No, I will say, I do think that the Office of Planning and generally, they're smart growth advocates often take at face value the things that developers say about what they need to do to make the map square out. I think we can be more aggressive, and we will still find them coming here to build housing, right? And that's true of all of we have all these government buildings in the city, so we have, when you go vote, the ballot in the drop box is on Idaho Avenue by the police station, and when you're looking up, when you drop off your ballot and vote for me, look up, you'll see the police station there. It's old, it's not looking great, and there's all this extra space, and across from it there's a multifamily building. We could build some housing there. And since we own it, this is our space, we don't have to be in the position where we're just relying on inclusionary zoning. We can do multiple things. We could build it ourselves. We could enter into it and make it true social housing. We could also, have a bidding war and say, if you want to come, if you want to build housing in this extremely lucrative place to build housing, you have to do 40%, 30% affordable housing, whatever number we want to set. We want a school campus there. We want a grocery store there. Wouldn't be that in that place because there's one up there, but you get my point. And we can do that, and it happens. I worked on this when I was in law school. I worked at the Brooklyn Public Library, and it's one of the largest landowners in Brooklyn. And they have a number of libraries that they wanted to redevelop. Some of them are beautiful and historic, a lot of them are not. And what they did, and I think this is one option, is they took a look at the libraries that were in extremely wealthy areas, And they said, let's redevelop that, let's make some money, let's also make sure we have more affordable units than we would on our inclusionary zoning. And then let's take that and redevelop over here in this other area and build more housing there. And what they got was world-class libraries, more housing, more affordable units at almost zero cost, right? They didn't make a profit because that's not how they did it, but that is a profit, right? And so that's something that we can do with those things. Any other one? Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned at the beginning there's tons of candidates, right?
Yes. There are.
And I personally am having trouble differentiating some folks, right?
Sure.
Example is I think Matthew Fruman's a great candidate. I think you're a great candidate.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could stand up, I should put anyone on the spot, but like, I wondered if you could maybe try to distinguish, for example, on housing policy.
Yeah.
How do you think that you're different? I know you're very different from one candidate, but I'm wondering how you think your views are different and what you would do different from some of the other candidates like Matthew Fruman.
Yeah, so I think Matt places a huge emphasis on consensus, and I think that I understand where he's coming from. But what I say is everyone deserves to be listened to, but not everyone deserves to be indulged. And in this ward, we've had a huge problem, and it's been a huge problem when it comes to housing. And having, we can't afford to have another 10 years where we spend years talking about a single project. And getting people to yes who they're not being truthful with why they're not getting to yes, right? We have to move past those folks. We also have to have a council member who's not just not going to wait for people to wake up and want the right things, but who's going to lead them, who's going to come to the meetings early in the process, not wait till the end when the votes happens and they can see where people are and what neighborhoods are upset and what neighborhoods are not upset. But early on in the process, come to the room and say, we need to build more homes. We need to build homes of all types. And what are the concerns about this project? Let's get to yes. Because the train is moving, and we have got to get the train moving, and we got to get on board. And there are legitimate criticisms of many developments. The architecture, aesthetics matter. These things live forever, right? We should care about how things look. Not always, but they live for a long time. And we should care about whether there are amenities, and we should care about all these different things. But we can't let that be an obstacle, an unnecessary obstacle. So I think that's a big sort of leadership difference. I think the other thing is that other candidates have talked only about building apartment buildings on Connecticut Avenue in Wisconsin Avenue. And even there, if you drilled into it, when you talk about the planning process in Chevy Chase, we need to listen to everyone and we go slow. Why are we talking about whether we should build a 5-story, 6-story apartment building on a 4-lane avenue where there are metro stations and there are other apartment buildings? Why is that even a conversation that we're indulging? We upzoned it. We had years of conversation about that. Let's move forward. Let's talk instead about between these avenues, about Cleveland Park, about Woodley Park, about Spring Valley, about Palisades, and talk about how we can build communities that are more inclusive. And that should be where the thoughtfulness happens. And I don't think Matt has said a word about that, and I know that he has taken off the table changing single-family zoning. I don't think that that's the way we're going to deal with housing, and I don't think that's the way we're going to deal with diverse work. And we have to have those conversations about, neighborhoods change, and we need a leader who recognizes that and helps the people in the neighborhood become part of the solution to build a neighborhood that thrives. Yeah. Yes, Betty.
Hi, I'm just wondering what your relationship is with current members of the council who will be remaining on the council, who are not up for re-election, and how you propose to become a leader to encourage all of these progressive steps that you would like to see.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think, I'll say this, I think that there are a lot of folks on the council who do a great job, and I have a lot of respect for. I think where the council sometimes falls short, and where I hope to play a role in helping all of us do better, is not spending enough time engaging with criticism of proposals. So, sort of kind of a different take on what I just was talking about. There are bills that try to accomplish great things, that I am fully supportive of the goal and the idea and the policy, but there are issues with the fine print and with the nuance of the legislative text. And you need members who will engage with people who are in the business community, who are progressives, and talk to them and pressure test legislation. And I think that doesn't always happen. Happens less than it should. And that's something that I hope to be a value add for the progressive members on the council. But I think also for some of the folks who are more conservative, I think there's a lot of reticence around ideas that seem new because people are afraid to be left with the bag. They're afraid to be left with something that doesn't work out. And we have got to up our ambition. We've got to give people permission to dream a little bigger. And that's something we can do in this ward, because I think one of the things that happens is people look at Ward 3 and they say, well, this is the conservative ward. This is the ward where they don't like change. And so we'll go as far as their council member is willing to go. And so I think that creates a lot of responsibility on the Ward 3 council member to be someone who doesn't, give up on something before we even start the conversation, something that's a good idea and important. But also, on the flip side, the Ward 3 council member needs to be responsible and needs to play that role as well. So I hope to kind of play both those things. But without, I'm not going to talk about any of the individual council
And
members.
also, what's your plan for the Warden Taylor building and the surrounding area?
Yeah, so
I'm thinking a high school would be wonderful.
So I'm glad you raised that. So I'm not for making it historic. I think that is the first thing I'll say, which is a real conversation. And on historic preservation generally, I think we need to have a conversation about re-examining some things. Why is a parking lot historic in Cleveland Park? I don't know. But on Warren Taylor, we have a huge school capacity problem in the ward, and we do need to add secondary schools to go to the middle school level. So the new school plans are going to relieve capacity issues at Jackson Reed at the high school by creating a new high school. There's going to be a new elementary school. I said there will be a new elementary school. That's an ongoing issue. There will be one on Foxhall. There will be a new high school on MacArthur. That's not going to relieve the middle school pressure on Deal. So that's an opportunity, perhaps at the Warden Taylor site, perhaps elsewhere in the ward. But at the end of the day, we have got to build a lot more housing there and the metro. And we have to be aggressive about it, and we have to not be afraid to have, to remake a mall that's dead into something that's alive. So that is what I want to see. And school is important. I think there are other amenities that we could also include there as part of the conversation. Senior housing, and there's an ongoing conversation about where to put a senior wellness center. That could be a place that's very, metro access is important. So I think that's an exciting conversation, but it's also where it becomes critical that we have a council member who doesn't just listen to the people who are already there, who are already engaged. Because if you go to an ANC meeting, there's always the same 20 people, and they have the same perspective, which is no. Doesn't matter what the issue is, it's usually no. And there's a reason why, and sometimes they may be right, sometimes they may be wrong, but we have to be listening to other people, including people who don't live there yet, who would be living there if we built the apartments. Yeah.
What can we do to help?
What can you do to help? That's a great question. And I think that's a good way to end it. So, two things. One, vote for me, please. I'm asking for your vote because this is a critical election, and thank you. The other issues is getting to people, so getting to voters. And that happens a few different ways. It happens in personal conversations, emails, calls, to your friends, signing up to host a meet and greet. It could be 5 people, it could be 4 people, it could be 10 people. That conversation is very important. And then also canvassing. If you got the leg strength, you got the energy, and you have a water bottle, we're going to be knocking doors this weekend, and we would love to have you. And the last one is no, which is it's always the thing in an election. There's a $50 limit because I'm a fair elections candidate, and but the great thing about that is it's matched 5 to 1 for DC donors. $50 becomes $300, and we've done okay. We're not, we've not raised as much money as other campaigns, but right now we are in a situation where we need about 100 more donors. Like that's I did the math yesterday. We have 100 more donors, we can execute the final plan that we need to do. So if you have 3 friends, 4 friends, you've been convinced to chip in $50 or $25, that's going to ensure that we can do the advertising online, which I know some people have been seeing on the Facebook and Instagram, do those ads, do those YouTube ads, do the mailers, and execute that plan. So those are the things that we can do to win. Yes?
I still have 2 questions.
Please, yeah.
So where do you stand on the tip wage issue?
Great question.
And
Yes.
where do you stand on whether the district should offer anything to bring the residents back?
Okay. Oh, those are all very simple questions. So on the tip wage, I'm voting for it. I support it. Joe Biden, when he ran for president in 2020, talked about how having a tip lower than normal tip minimum wage creates room for abuse. It's unfair and it's unnecessary. We can have a tip, we can have tips, and we can have people being paid a living wage at the same time. And the arguments against it, I think, are not persuasive. But the other part of it is, I will not vote to overturn an initiative that's passed by the voters. The fact that the council did that, Mary Chase said this when it happened, it was outrageous. I mean, my God. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do that. I think the margin was, 60%? I don't remember, but it was a substantial majority of voters voted to raise the tip minimum wage. And then to have members of the council say, no, we know better, because people that the restaurant industry found to come testify convinced us that workers don't really want it. People can fall back on those talking points that they heard from workers who didn't want it, and there were workers who didn't want it. But those people were brought there, paid to come there by the restaurant industry because they didn't want to pay people a living wage. And I find it remarkable, and I hope that the council chairman who's running for re-election is held accountable for that decision, because that was something he pushed through, and other members of the council. On the Redskins, no, hell no. Hell no. I think stadiums are an interesting case of where they can be part of the solution, and we've seen that in parts of DC. But the NFL stadiums, the gateway to the city, as people drive in, there is a lot we can do with that site. And having it be the Commanders' stadium is not going to happen. And I wish them luck, because they're having trouble finding anybody who wants that. So we'll see. But thank you very much. I appreciate everybody for coming, and I'll stay around. Thank you.